All right, welcome to another episode of Work in Programming. I'm Matthew Weeks, and I'm here today with Riegie. I'm sorry, I don't know.
Jeyaranchen. Everyone messes that up. It's all good.
All right. So yeah, we were just chatting before this about how we met. So I guess we could start from there. You were the co-founder of a company called Food Shooter, where I kind of worked for like a month or two
Right.
with you guys as an Android developer, kind of intern for a little bit. Do you want to maybe, and we can just get back into what we were talking about before, but
Sure. Yeah. So this is a startup that I did with one of my best friends in 2012. So I actually left school to do the startup. And I think, Matt, you joined in 2014 or
yeah,
2013. I'm not quite sure.
summer 2014, but I'm not sure.
Yeah. Yeah. And at the time, I remember the first day that you came, we actually brought you to some event. And there was a guy there asking about, how long we've been doing this.
Mhm.
And when he came to you, he's like, it's actually my first day. And he's like, oh. And like that exchange was really hilarious and quite awkward. But, I still remember that. And I remember how, I was trying to explain how the back end works and all this stuff. And you're a bit confused at the time. And I felt like we could have done a better job
Yeah.
explaining some of the stuff. And, we were still new at the time. We didn't even know what we were doing. We were
Yeah,
learning as we were
remember
going.
my first day, you handed me a USB key with the Android,
Yeah.
and I was just like, "Oh, this is cool."
Yeah, we weren't even using any version control or anything like that. So that goes to show how amateur we were at the time when we started. And keep in mind too, at the time when we started, none of us had actual programming experience either.
Mhm.
So we were all learning on the fly. Like none of us went to school for this except for one of the other co-founders who was doing the iOS app.
Right. Yeah.
So yeah, I mean, I hope, during the time that you spent with us, it was somewhat useful. I don't know. I mean, I
Yeah.
mean, was it useful?
Like I was saying earlier, I think it forced me to realize you can just kind of get started on something. And
Right.
it ended up not being quite the right match, just because it was like a commute, and it ended up being I needed to work and make money for the summer or whatever,
Hmm.
for the year. But during that time, I picked up a few things. I got more confident with doing some Android development, I guess, and it was bootstrap, I guess. It wasn't
Yeah. Yeah.
really a full fledged, because we didn't really work together for very long either. Like, it just didn't
Hmm.
make sense in the end.
Yeah.
But as a result, I feel like what it taught me was you just need to get started. If you can go to a hackathon and put something together, and that's your POC,
Right. Right.
you can do the same thing and then turn that into a company, which is what you guys did.
Yeah.
I thought that was kind of interesting. So
Hmm.
from there, I actually kind of left that, joined I forget the name now, but the Young Entrepreneurs program that they have for Ontario, and then basically just got a little grant to try and start my own company.
Hmm.
And it got me into freelancing, which was good. In terms of yeah, I think it's and it was a nice experience to kind of see, because you don't really have much access to the startup ecosystem unless you're a part of either a startup, or you're just you're always out there. And
Right. Right.
in Toronto at the time, it was growing, but it was pretty small.
Yeah, like now it's different. It's completely different. Like
Oh
there's
yeah.
startups everywhere, but at the time when we were doing it, there were very few, and the startup culture was starting to take foot. But yeah,
Yeah, if
so
you went to a hacker nest or something like that at that time, you wouldn't be seeing right now you see all sorts of startups, and there's tons of tiny sponsors and things like that.
right,
But when you used to do it, it would be just computer science students. There's
exactly.
no there's no big players in the game, I guess, at the time. So
Hmm.
it was pretty cool to experience that. But I'm curious how you guys actually made that leap. You left school, so were you studying computer science before that, or?
No, I wasn't. I was actually doing biophysics, so it had nothing to do with computer science whatsoever.
Yeah,
But at the time that I was doing biophysics, I felt really lost at school.
yeah,
Like I wasn't really enjoying the stuff that I was learning, and when you're not really enjoying what you're learning, you're not going to do well, right? You're not going to put in the effort. You're not going to put in the enthusiasm or the time to learn the stuff.
yeah. I mean, you're
Um,
paying so much money to go and do it, and
exactly, right? And it's kind of crazy because I left and I more so joined the startup out of desperation, to be
mhm,
honest. It was like, okay, you know what? If there's anything that I can do with my life, this is it,
right,
and this is my only option. So even that kind of became my motivation for even learning how to code.
Mhm.
I didn't learn to code because I wanted to. It was just turned out to be okay. Well, turns out this is the only thing that I can only do right now to get to the next level. So that's how that happened. But when I started learning how to code, I actually enjoyed it, and it's
Mhm.
kind of strange. It's like I never thought that I'd end up coding, but it turns out, I was meant for this all along. It's just crazy. I don't know. I feel
Yeah.
like everything happens for a reason. So yeah.
Yeah, no, I agree with that like 100%. I've always found that like I took kind of leaps in taking certain opportunities or like going out on my own. And like whenever I did that sort of thing, I mean, I think the first thing I ever built that was like pretty like I felt like it was meaningful,
Right.
that I really loved. Like I felt so passionate about it. I built this little app, and like we went to like Mexico for a week, right? And
Hmm.
I skipped my midterms. Don't tell my mom for like two of my classes. One of them I had
Hmm.
almost 100% in, so I basically just flew through it anyway.
Right. Right.
And the other one was for physics, and I still never completed that credit. Uh, it was maybe not the greatest, I guess, educationally,
Hmm.
but I ended up going there, and we built an entire company in a month. And the
Yeah.
product ended up being like pretty successful, and I felt like I learned so much. Like I taught myself React because we needed to do it for the
Hmm.
job, right? It wasn't like
Exactly.
I find that like if you're building something that you actually give a shit about,
Hmm.
that's when you like learn the most. Versus
Right.
if you're just trying to, so I did computer science.
Hmm.
Like, I did learn a lot. I learned a lot of fundamentals that are still useful today.
Hmm.
And there are certain concepts that I picked up, but the majority of the job you learn when out of necessity, like you said.
Yeah, and the weird thing is, there's this idea that you still need to get a degree or whatnot to get some sort of accreditation in order to be in the tech field, and I feel like that idea is dying, right? There's all these resources online nowadays, right? You can learn stuff from websites like Code School or YouTube, right? There's tons of resources out there,
Mhm.
and you know, I feel like that mentality of, okay, well, right after you finish high school, you got to go to university, get a degree, and then get a job. I
Yeah.
feel like that whole mentality is dying out,
Oh,
right?
it's just it doesn't make sense. Like it used to because it gave you access, right? Like you graduated school and potentially. So for instance, I did co-op through university.
Hmm.
I went and actually got the job myself by applying to like a role and then getting it and then going back to my school and saying, oh hey, I know I'm not in the program anymore, but could I do this co-op? But
Hmm.
like a lot of the students, like they got connections to like IBM. Few people went to like Google for internships, and you don't really necessarily get that access all the time. Uh,
Right.
but I still feel like you can actually springboard yourself into jobs like that without a degree. You just need to, do the work ahead of time. Like if you spend 4 years at a university and you spend 2 years working, like 2 years working is going to be like significantly more valuable
Oh,
experience.
100%. Like when the employer looks at that, or whoever's trying to hire you, they're going to look at the experience, and that will trump the education that you had, right? And that continues going forward to any other job that you apply for, right? They're going to look at the last thing you did. They're not going to care about which school you went to or what degree you have at that
Your
point, right?
GPA comes, you're applying for your first senior job, and then they're asking you about your
Yeah.
GPA in university.
Yeah. Like that will never be the case, right? And like again, like I'm not going to say university is useless. It's definitely useful for a lot of things. Like you said, you learned a lot of the foundational stuff when you went to school, right?
Yeah.
But and
Is
that
when you
kind of,
start university young,
sorry,
you're
say that again.
I think the other thing is like you start university, like if you typically you're starting university, computer science, whatever, you're doing it
Hmm.
pretty young.
Right.
So at that age, I think it's you're a little bit less mature. So for me at least, I think I grew up a lot
Right. Right.
during university, and it was
Yeah.
like it forced me into learning coding and all that. But I think there's a
Mhm.
lot more people nowadays that get into it from different areas.
Exactly. Yeah. And I think that's changed now, especially like in 2020. I feel like a lot more, like we get resumes all the time at my current company, and some of the people that come in, they don't actually have a degree in the field that they're applying the job for. And right. So for example, one of the guys who I think is like one of the best engineers on our team actually has a poli-sci degree,
Mhm.
which is completely opposite to computer science, but
Yeah.
he's the most well-versed person I know in Python. So yeah, it just goes to show that if you really care about the stuff and you're willing to put in the work, that you can make it.
Yeah. Yeah, there's a lot of the people that we hire at my company come from like boot camps and whatnot.
Yeah.
And I find that people that come from a different field first, like
Hmm.
I'm like, I mean, it's still school and whatnot, but if somebody's like worked in, say, like, I don't know, like doing editing at like at a newspaper or like in like some sort of other field, like bartenders, for instance, even like they just kind of bring different levels of experience and different like, you know, perspectives, I guess, to a team.
Yeah, for sure. Different way of thinking.
Yeah, yeah. And like you don't have as much of the I don't know, like you can imagine like if you got a computer science like a bunch of grads, and you know there's going to be different like levels of like people are going to be discussing different things
Hmm.
with a little bit more nuance versus like just kind of constantly talking about code or
Yeah, 100%. I agree. It makes the workplace a lot more fun too. So yeah.
yeah. Cool. And so after so how did what happened with Food Shooter? I'm curious.
So in food, we continued doing it up until 2015. Ran out of funds. We started going around to a bunch of investors, and we couldn't secure any funding. And what kind of set the tone for us to shut everything down was there was this one investor that we went to, and we did the pitch and everything, and he was like, you guys don't seem like you guys have your heart in it anymore, and do you guys? And we all looked at each other and we're like, no, we don't.
Hmm.
And he's like, so then why are you guys doing this? He's like, I'm saying this for your own good. He's like, there's no point in you guys trying to pursue trying to get funds.
Yeah.
You're wasting your time. Like, you guys have put in 3 years of your lives into this already, and there's no sense in you trying to continue it even further. At some point you have to learn to say no.
Yeah.
And I think that was a very pivotal moment for me at that
Mhm.
moment in time, to finally let go, because it was very hard for all of us to let go of it.
Yeah. I can
uh, but letting go was probably the best decision, because from stopping Food Shooter and turning ourselves into a creative agency,
imagine.
we were able to take on different kinds of projects. So now, instead of working on one project, which was Food Shooter, we ended up building apps for a bunch of different clients.
Oh, that's
And that during that time period, that's when I learned the most, because different kinds of problems, right, that you have to solve. And it was a great way of making money for us as well, right? We were making a lot of money, but not enough to the point where I'd say I'd be able to sustain myself. But better, like in comparison to when I was doing the whole startup life,
yeah.
I was in a much better place. Yeah.
Yeah. I think like there's a big benefit to doing like creative work for a client.
Yeah.
You get to like experience a lot of different aspects of the different code bases, different stacks,
Hmm.
and then just different products. So you kind of like think from more of like a product focus in
Exactly.
like in a very high level.
Yeah. And a lot of these clients who did approach us, they didn't have any, product scope whatsoever. So we actually saw the product right from the infancy all the way till launch. We did everything. So all the pre-planning, the UI, UX, where certain features would go, what makes sense and what didn't. So
Yeah.
we handled, basically, we built the MVPs of a lot of these products. And uh, one of the products that we actually built was actually bought by another company. So we built something called Token and Gate. It's like an event app, and it was bought by this company called Showcase this year. So
Okay.
I'm pretty proud of that. But yeah, I mean, I think based on all the work that we've done during that period, I'd say that was the time that I learned the most, because of how versatile the different projects were.
Yeah. That's amazing. And like,
Yeah.
how many? So when you were doing this, were you working on like what kind of back end did you build? Just curious.
So everything was on Django and Express on using Node.js. And yeah, we did a lot of live functionality as well. So that's where the Node.js component came in.
Right.
But for the most part, everything was in Django. Yeah, and we hosted everything up on AWS. And for our mobile apps, we did native Android and iOS,
Mhm.
right? And we did our own UX and UI. Yeah.
Was it just the three of you still, or?
Yeah, it was still the three of us. It was still the three of us, and we actually brought on another guy to do Android. It's funny. It's like I think you met him. I think you met him during the time when you joined as well. So
Uh, what was his
he
name?
actually Sivam.
Sybil. Oh, yeah, I think so.
Yeah, yeah. So he stuck around with us for a bit, and then he had to leave because again, when you're an entrepreneur,
Yeah.
this is the other thing too. So when you're an entrepreneur, you have to also think about the question of whether or not it's worth it.
Oh yeah.
And the same thing with this whole agency thing that we were doing. We were doing it for 3 years, and then we realized we're not making the money that we need to be making, right? So passion aside, it's great to have passion. It's great to, want to do things outside of the norm. But if it's not giving you the ability to sustain yourself,
Mhm.
then you have to realize, okay, this isn't working out for me. What's the next thing that I can do? Right. And
Mhm.
so with this agency thing, I was doing it for 3 years, and all the founders, we all realized, look, we're all going to get married soon. We want to have our own families. We want to get our own apartments and all the stuff. We need to start moving out and whatnot. So we realized this wasn't going to work out, and we started to think about other options, right?
Mhm.
And that's when I just honestly applied to this company that I'm working at right now. And this company is like the best thing that's ever happened in my life. Like I've learned so much here. The team I'm working with is great. And yeah, I don't know. It's just, I never thought that I'd go from being an entrepreneur to working for someone else.
Yeah.
But I feel like this is where I belong. I've done the whole entrepreneur lifestyle,
Yeah.
and I'm safe to say that I'm kind of done with it for now. Like I did it, and I was happy that I did it because I learned a lot. And if I didn't do that, then maybe I wouldn't be where I am right now.
Right.
So, but
It's like
that,
it's
yeah,
like leaping board in a way. Like it's a stepping stone towards, like, if you want to get into a career, becoming an entrepreneur is kind of like the best way to approach it, because then getting a job in the field ends up being like the worst case scenario.
exactly.
I felt the same way when because I used to freelance, and I was doing it for, I think 3 years
Hmm.
straight, and it turned into like a full-time income, and I was really enjoying it. And I just found at some point that the hustle, like trying to chase down clients and find new clients, and
It's hard, man. It's really
yeah,
hard,
and
right?
it's you're responsible for yourself. And when you get rewarded, it's a big reward. But then the downtimes are just as trying,
Yeah,
and it kind of pushes you to, like, you start to push that on yourself a bit.
exactly.
It's a weird treadmill.
Yeah, so like even for me, like from 20, so imagine this, like you were talking about the whole downtime, right? Like that whole period that you have, like you have the good times and the bad times. But for me, from 2012 till I'd say about 2019,
Mm,
it was mostly in the down, right?
mm,
Because that's the whole trap, right, of being an entrepreneur. You're thinking, okay, I'm almost at the end of the tunnel. I
yeah.
can see the light and I'm almost there.
Mhm.
And you have to tell yourself at a certain point whether or not it's worth it to continue,
Yeah.
right? You have to have that realization, because if you don't, it's very dangerous, right?
Oh
You're
yeah.
going to start pushing the people that you know closest to you away. Everyone who tells you, listen, this isn't working out, you're going to be like, no, you don't know what you're talking about. Even people who really care about you, right? They're telling you this for your own good.
Yeah.
You start to push them away, and that's where it gets really dangerous. So I'm
And
glad that I had
it's like
people around me to set me straight. Yeah.
yeah, and then there's like a kind of a pervasive culture on like, just online, I found.
Yeah.
It's all about this, like, the hustle no matter what, and like,
Oh yeah, dude. I know exactly what you're talking about. Yeah.
yeah, and it feeds into the same thing, like
Yeah.
it kind of it's like joining a cult,
Yeah. Exactly. Right.
except you're in charge.
Yeah. Yeah. And that's exactly how I felt about it. It felt like being in a cult. And you're stuck in this bubble. So no matter what other people say from the outside, you don't realize it until you get out.
Yeah.
Right. And I'm not saying that the entrepreneur lifestyle is bad. I'm just saying that you have to realize when it's time to, you know, just quit
Yeah.
and find the next best thing. Right. So
Yeah.
yeah, if you surround yourself around the right people, then you can do it. Yeah.
Yeah, it's good that you had like that core group around you, like the two of you started it together,
Yeah.
and you stuck with it the entire time through. Because I think, like, so for instance, like when I went into business, I went entirely solo, right?
Hmm.
And I ended up working with some of my friends, but I never had a partner in the
Right.
business.
Right.
And I think that doing that, it's almost like you kind of feel like you're more accountable, but then you also feel like, your successes are your own. But like at the same time, there is like so much value in having somebody else to bolster you. And every successful entrepreneur that I've talked to, like I talked to my friend Tom on this podcast as well, and he ran his own startup for, I think, like 3, 4, maybe 5 years.
Right.
he was just kind of like struggling through it too.
Hmm.
And it seems like it's the same situation where he had a friend that or a co-founder that was working with him that was almost like they didn't have the same personality, they didn't have the same perspective, they kind of bolstered one another. Did you guys have that kind of relationship in a way, or?
Yeah, I mean, all three of us did. I'd say one more than the other. And I think when one of our co-founders left, that's when it kind of set the motions in my head.
Yeah.
And one of our other external friends who wasn't really a part of the company, one day he came over to our office and he said, it's not just you guys anymore. It's you guys and the people around you at home. So your wives or your girlfriends or whatnot, right? And that's when it hit me because at the time I was married, right? I'm still married now, but yeah. So so that kind of hit close to home because I realized he's right because I can't just think, I'm almost 30. I can't keep doing this, right? I have a wife now and I have to look after her as well, right? And I think that really, you know, put me out of that whole bubble and made me think differently.
Yeah.
And so yeah, I have to really give props to that friend and
Yeah.
big props to my wife as well for helping me get out of that zone. Yeah.
Mm. I'm surprised a lot of people glorify like their like I for one like I sometimes look back and I like only think of the positive sides of
Hmm.
my whole like journey.
Yeah.
But there was like definitely some negative parts there that I mean obviously I left for a reason, right?
Hmm.
That's interesting. It's good to hear that you had good people around you to like stick through.
Yeah. Yeah. And again, I learned a lot during over those years. If that didn't happen, I wouldn't have had the opportunity to do the job that I have now, which I absolutely love. So yeah, I'm thankful for all those years, even though most of it sucked. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, it's great to hear. And then so I guess in terms of like what are you working on now?
So right now I'm on the back end team, and basically the company I work for is called Payfare, and we basically do instant payments for Uber, Lyft, Didi, and DoorDash drivers. So instead of drivers waiting 2 weeks to get their payments, they right after they finish their ride, they get paid right away.
Oh,
And yeah, so we work. I basically work on the back end with a bunch of other engineers to make that all happen. And yeah, like the team I work with is amazing. That's the one thing that I really love about this company is the people that I work with. Like the group of people that just came together is just perfect combination. So
is it
yeah,
a large company or
sorry, say that again.
how large is the company?
I'd say it's about 30 to 40 people.
Okay.
Yeah, yeah,
Sizable. You guys are pretty established, I take it.
yeah. I mean, we're getting there, but I'd say we're pretty well established. Yeah,
Cool.
like we don't really have an engineering culture yet. It's still something that we're trying to make.
Mhm.
But that's the interesting part. Like I'm having a lot of fun and yeah, I mean, it's just I've learned so much. I've learned so much more working at this company than I ever did working by myself,
Yeah.
which is kind of strange to say, but yeah, it's because when you're working with others, you can validate, some of the things, some of the doubts that you have, or
Mhm.
certain ways of doing things, and it's just amazing. I'm so glad that I got this job. I wish I had done this sooner. So yeah.
Yeah. That's amazing because I think that yeah, like there's a benefit of learning how to like I guess push yourself when you're learning through like doing it on your own, but when you're working with others, you get called on your bullshit a lot quicker.
Oh, 100%, 100%. And yeah, it's just the fact that you can have someone else to learn something new. It's just like it's one thing to read something off the internet and kind of do it yourself, but to have someone right beside you and be like, "Hey, how does this work?" and then they go through the motions of explaining it, like it's totally different, man.
Oh yeah, definitely.
Yeah.
And then so your team, like the back end team, there is just you, or no? You said there's a
Oh,
few.
there's including me, there's four of us, I believe. Yes, there's four of us, and we have two DevOps guys, and we have a mobile team as well that does both Android and iOS. Yeah.
Cool, cool.
Yeah. So our backends in Flask and we're hosted up on AWS.
Mhm.
And yeah, and um, when you again, I know I keep saying a lot about my team, but when you're in a team setting, you end up learning about a lot of new technologies that you never knew existed beforehand.
Yeah. Can you name
So
or like what's some examples? I'd love to hear.
oh, it's like Kubernetes, like holy
Right.
smokes.
Are you guys using Kubernetes for your deployments and everything?
Yep. So our DevOps team is doing all of that, and our DevOps team is amazing. Like they do a great job of handling all that. They've built the entire infrastructure. They've built like certain applications, like internal apps for us to even deploy code a lot quicker. So
Mhm.
I'd give kudos to those guys. Yeah.
Yeah, like Kubernetes and things like that, like definitely are like another level. It's interesting when you get like the need for a DevOps team,
Hmm.
because a lot of startups don't really like, you get started, you're doing it yourself, you're like being scrappy. You probably
Hmm.
don't have that
Hmm.
infrastructure, like a team that's dedicated to infrastructure. And then once you get there, I imagine that there's a lot like a higher level of sophistication going on, right?
Yeah, 100%.
So how has it changed the way that you work with your like as you as your team work like with the tools that they've built that the you know is there anything differently that you're doing now that you wouldn't do normally?
So when I was working on my own, I didn't write unit tests at all,
Oh yeah,
right?
that's a
So
good point.
yeah, here the whole concept of writing unit tests is something that we're trying to ingrain in all the developers, and it's something new because I've never done it before, and I realized the importance of writing unit tests. I
Yeah.
remember you shared a document a while back. I think it was on LinkedIn, talking about the importance of why you should write unit tests and what the consequences are if you don't do them. Right?
Oh,
Um,
absolutely. Like, I mean, and the best thing is I find like once like you start off with a code base, you think that it's a lot faster not to write tests, and every
right.
developer, I think like, we just inherently assume that, right? But then once you get started and once you have a code base that has like a robust set of tests and like
Mhm.
the setup that you have an example of how to test individual things.
Right.
You can change like you can basically like look at your testing patterns and like build utilities and things like that. And then once you can test quickly, like you just notice so many problems so much faster. Like
Right.
you make a bug, like you suddenly have a failing test, you can't push to you shouldn't be able to push broken code, and it's like how do you know? And you're
Exactly. Right.
so much, yeah. It's an interesting. It's one of those things. It's like a nice like it's like a paradigm shift.
Yeah. So one of the things at our company is that um, when you have really good unit tests
Yeah.
and you're building out a new feature,
Mhm.
you can be confident that your thing won't break because the unit tests are written really well, and that's the importance of it, right? The level of confidence you have in the features that you're building,
Mhm.
and when you're when your unit tests are good, and you can be confident that the feature you're building isn't going to break in production.
Yeah.
So that's it. That's why I think you should put a big emphasis on writing unit tests.
Mhm.
And something that I think we will be doing soon is doing test driven development. So writing the unit test first
Mhm.
and then writing the code for it. The thing is, we move so fast. Like we're such a small team, like tech wise. Like
Yeah,
we're about like small to medium size, but
of course.
we're working on so many features at the same time. Like you know
How do you manage it? Are you using like Jira or?
Yeah, we use Jira to manage everything. So our product team's really great. They scope out all the features and create tickets in Jira, and then we just take on the tickets and start working on them. And our DevOps team has made it so easy so that when we create a branch, it's linked to the Jira ticket. So
Mhm.
as we push code, you can see the updates in Jira. So that's really great. So the product team can see our progress and all that kind of stuff.
Yeah, I guess once you get everything set up into like a nice groove, like automation changes everything, right? Like you
100%.
see
Yeah.
all your stuff. The best is like if you make a PR. That's why I love like some tools like simple tools like Netlify.
Hmm.
If I'm working on like personal sites and whatnot, like the fact that you can spin up like a new environment per pull request, and you can do the same in like if you're using something like Jenkins X now,
Hmm.
it's actually apparently it's pretty easy to set up. It just spins up a new cluster in your Kubernetes and it just works.
Hmm.
But like if you can set that up, it changes a lot because you can have people come in and test your feature and you don't have to be running it locally or doing some weird hack just to get somebody else to be able to give you some feedback, right?
Yeah. Yeah. Exactly. Yeah.
So I guess what else we could talk about? I don't know. Is there anything else that's like really interesting you in to you right now in terms of like just new technologies or different like ways of building software? I know
Yeah.
you
So for
tooling.
me, I think Docker has completely changed the game.
Yeah.
I feel like before the way I used to deploy code was I'd have a virtual environment on EC2 and
Mhm.
then use a script I'd use a library called Python Fabric, and what that would do is basically SSH into that EC2 instance and download all the dependencies, and then do a Git pull from GitHub, and then spin up the server and do all that stuff, right?
Okay, so you scripted it out still, like you weren't manually SSHing in and then pulling.
No, no, yeah. When I first started, I was doing that, and that turned out to be a pain. And then
Yeah.
I used the script, and that changed. That was a game changer. But Docker has really changed the game in the sense that you don't really necessarily need to care about the underlying platform that you're running your code on,
Mhm.
right? And the way we do the way we ship code is all through Docker, right? So we push our code onto Docker images, and that's how they get built, and that's how they get deployed through
Yeah.
Kubernetes and stuff. So I feel like that's really a game changer.
Yeah.
And something that I'm trying to learn right now is Kubernetes. I really want to, get the hang of it. I just want to understand how it works.
Mhm.
And I've also started digging into Vue.js, front end frameworks and stuff. I wanted to learn React, but I feel like because we use Vue.js at work, I feel like that would be a lot
It's
more useful.
probably better to learn your own stack. I mean, like I've actually I haven't touched Vue yet, but I've heard it's like a kind of a nice hybrid between like lightweight like React, but a little bit more robust with like more opinions like Angular is
Hmm.
the way I've heard it described.
Hmm.
It sounds interesting for sure.
So you've done more so front end kind of work, right? Like that's where
Yeah,
you're.
I've kind of bounced around. I've always been full stack. So like
Mhm.
since I went out on my own, I built like I started with Angular and Node.js and
Mhm.
Express. And then I moved into like, okay, now I'm freelancing. I did a React application with a lightweight Express backend, and then I built
Nice.
full on like, real time streaming app, and like also in the process did like a website, like, React app, and then also a React Native app.
Mhm.
And then since I started working full time, it's kind of like bounced around almost every project. Like
Mhm.
my last project was rebuilding like a pretty large site. Like I can't name the name, but it's like a large client.
Right. Right.
And like something you would use.
Mhm.
And it was just a web application, and we were basically building out a design system for them, and then also building their React site. And then I was
Mhm.
integrating all of the backend because they've got all these different tools. They've got all these different APIs. Pretty large site.
Mhm.
So it was like a huge team, huge effort. And then now I'm working on an entirely backend application with Kubernetes,
Nice.
which is kind of cool. Get to kind of explore. They've got an interesting setup where rather than writing raw. Actually, that'd be interesting. How do you manage your kube config files? Do you know how they do that?
Oh, I have no idea. I think they do it through Terraform or something like that. Like
Oh, cool. Yeah.
I think that's what they're using, which is good because then they can track their changes easily, right? So yeah, like again, I know nothing to the scale that these guys do,
Yeah.
but they've got it pretty well handled. So,
Yeah.
but from what I know, I'm pretty sure they do use Terraform to make those kind of changes.
I think my understanding is like you still end up needing a kube config of some sort, but you can use Terraform to spin up the infrastructure.
Right. Right.
I haven't used Terraform directly myself. I've had it in a code base. Like
Hmm.
last year, this is the fun part I think about consulting, right?
Hmm.
And this is why I ended up going in going to a company versus continuing to work on my own.
Hmm.
Is like you just end up working on such different scale of things. Like just
Right.
last year, I was working on like a banking application. Uh,
Hmm.
but then right after that, I went in with this startup that's like in the travel space, and they wanted to like rebuild their entire platform. So we got to do DevOps for them,
Hmm.
and also like training / working alongside their DevOps manager who they just hired.
Right.
And it was a really interesting experience because we kind of you got to touch Kubernetes, but you weren't directly responsible for like all of the setup. We were more like building the pipelines and
Right. Right.
the application. But it's cool. Like it's a neat technology because yeah, like you can script out like it's neat that you can write out a description of your entire system and it just works.
Yeah. Yeah.
And then somebody who understands that can come into a new project, like look through those configurations and see, okay, this points to this service. This service accesses this database, but this
Right.
service is like, there's these different versions of it. The
Right. Right.
system that I'm working on now is really interesting because, we can go into the the Kubernetes and see the system, but not actually have access to, like if you had access to PCF or something like that,
Hmm.
you'd have to figure out like you have like all of your keys, you have to reason about how it works. But in this, you can just there's even like a VS Code plugin. You connect to your cluster. You can then look at every individual service that's ever been deployed.
Hmm.
You can look at all of the deployments that are there, and you can see which services spin up on which nodes, and
Hmm.
you can see what they connect to. But you can't see the secrets or something like that, right?
Yeah.
Because
Yeah.
secrets are held by some service, And the way that like the cloud providers are doing it now, like GCP is next level, but AWS you can integrate with like all of their services.
Yeah, yeah,
Um, but yeah, I really love those sorts of technologies because it makes everything so much more understandable.
exactly.
There's
Right.
no guesswork, right?
Yeah, yeah. And just on the topic of AWS and just DevOps in general, I feel like DevOps is an entirely different beast.
Yeah.
For a lot of devs, that are interested in doing DevOps, they um, you have to really want to do DevOps because it can be a headache sometimes, right? Like a lot of times when something goes down, they're the first guys that react, right? They're the first guys to know about it, right? So yeah, you need to be very well versed in this kind of stuff.
There's a lot of beepers and or what's that app for everyone that
PagerDuty.
PagerDuty. Like
Yeah.
I that's the one thing that's pushing me from like I would never know. I don't know if I'd want to do DevOps full time. I love the systems and I love the way it works, but I don't want to be on PagerDuty.
Mm-hmm.
My girlfriend got woken up at like I think it was like 5 a.m. one time with a pager reaction because like some other team broke some service and I was just like I couldn't imagine that like and it wasn't even an issue she could fix. It had nothing to do with her. It's just she's on duty, so they have to buzz her. And,
Yeah, like if you decide to go into it, you have to have the mindset for it. Like that's the only way you're going to survive. Yeah, like, and again, I keep saying this, but I think we have like one of the best DevOps teams like in the world. These guys are amazing. So yeah, kudos to them because whenever something goes down, they're always on it right away. They're writing RCAs and all this stuff. They're on top of everything. So yeah.
That's great. I mean, like it's so. How did you like? Were you there before the DevOps grew, or like how early on were you in?
So I started in May of last year, and the infrastructure's already there. Everything was pretty much done. I just kind of came in and had to learn the stack. Kind of inherited, the infrastructure that they had built. And again, for me, for my duties at the company, I was only responsible for just writing code. So I didn't have to worry about the infrastructure aspect of it, which was really nice, because before when I was working on my own, I had to worry about spinning up the EC2 servers, worry about the database, worry about how to make all the pieces work and whatnot. But that's kind of like a burden that's taken off of me and the team because now we have a dedicated DevOps team that handles all that stuff for you, right? And I got curious. I'm like, okay, so what is DevOps, right? And if you think about it, DevOps is really about making the lives of developers easy, right? So it's not just that, but I feel like a large part of what they do is give us the ability to ship code faster, to not worry about the infrastructure pieces and just focus on building features, which is great.
And like the interesting stuff, some stuff that even plays into there. I don't know if every company does it this way, but like for instance, when we were working on like just setting up like a DevOps system for a team, the DevOps manager was actually going as far as like his idea was like migrations, like versioning, everything should be controlled by the system. Like the dev shouldn't have to think about it. They just do what they're doing, and then as long as they follow the release cycle, or like they were doing a hybrid of like Git flow and some different I would call it like less structured, but it worked in the way that they wanted it to. And so whenever they make a release, he kind of like controlled that and he made it easier for them. Like it's cool because you're building out internal. Like I've never worked at like a large, like I would say that's a mid-sized large startup. Like I've worked more like alongside either enterprises where they've got all these layers of systems, or like startup clients through like at a pretty earlier stage. So it's interesting to see like kind of when you get to the point where you have like your own internal tools that you build. I think that's it's interesting because you kind of deviate from like what's kind of like the public favorite versus like what's your favorite.
Right. And the thing is, when you start building your tools, you're fine tuning it to what you need, which is good. I think it's amazing, right? And if people like usually a lot of these tools that are open source were originally internal tools that served a bigger purpose, right?
Yeah.
So
Kubernetes was just, originally Borg, which was just like Google's way of deploying containers.
right, exactly,
They
right.
just wanted a way to manage containers in a way that makes sense, and then they ended up building all this extra tooling around it.
Hmm.
Then I guess at some point they were like, oh shit, maybe someone else could use this.
Exactly, right. Yeah, I mean, it's just it's oh, the other thing too is with the field that we're in, there's so many new technologies and it's always going to keep changing. The landscape's going to
Oh,
keep
yeah.
changing all the time. And sometimes you might feel like it's a rabbit hole, right? So, for example, like because I'm learning Kubernetes, I was like, okay, Kubernetes is cool. All right, it uses Docker to deploy the containers, right, and whatnot. So, okay, so how does Docker work? So you look at how Docker works, and then you're like, okay, Docker communicates with the kernel. Great. Okay, so how does the kernel work? Okay, so the kernel, acts as the intermediate between the hardware and the OS. Okay, great. How does the hardware work? So you go down this rabbit hole of continually trying to figure out how everything works, right? And then eventually you get down to the atomic scale of how electricity works or how atoms work, right? Uh,
Yeah.
so I think it's important for developers to kind of just not go down that rabbit hole trying to figure out how things work under the hood.
Mhm.
Just know enough to get you by, and then over time you will begin to understand how things work under the hood.
So I almost think about it as the opposite in a sense. Like I kind of disagree with that in the sense
Hmm.
that so I think there's two ways that people learn in programming, right?
Hmm.
And because it's always changing, there's the breadth first, which
Hmm.
people kind of just learn everything and anything and everything that comes out that's new, and
Right.
you don't go deep, which there's benefits to that. It's easier to keep up, and if you want to like be popular on Twitter or
Hmm.
YouTube or whatever, I think that's probably the best way to kind of gain that.
Hmm.
But then there's also the fact that if you want to like really grow in a certain area, so for instance, if you're working with Flask and you want to, really build out the performance of that, or if you're, for me, it's JavaScript. I'm typically working with Node.
Hmm.
You kind of have to like dig into the nuance, right? So like at some point you got to figure out like, okay, so if you're working with Node.js, you don't want to block the cycle, but then which actions that you use potentially block, and then how does asynchronous behavior work? Like I think
Hmm.
some of those things are like really useful, especially as you grow in your career.
Right.
I
Right.
just think, but I think you're right, like that those things typically you don't necessarily need to know all of it to get started,
Right.
but you're gonna have to, or you don't have to, but it's beneficial to learn that stuff as you go. I
Yeah.
think the biggest thing people like screw up is they just don't get started, and they
Yeah.
think they know everything before they can even do anything. Which
So I'll tell you an interesting story. I went to PyCon 2 years ago, and it was PyCon Canada actually, and there was this lady who came in to talk about Django, right? And what's interesting about her is that she, like, when you think about frameworks, like front end frameworks or back end frameworks,
Mhm.
like, the purpose of what they serve is to make development easier, right?
Right,
So you don't necessarily need to understand how Python works, but as long as you understand how the framework works, you can build whatever it is you need to build,
right,
right? And this lady who came in, she's like, I still to this day don't know how to write classes. Still to this day, I don't know how to write, ternary operations, but I
Mhm.
can build a website for you if you ask me to build one.
Right,
And I think that's the most key takeaway is that as long as you can, like, for example, in the corporate world, if someone were to come to you and say, hey, build this feature,
Mhm.
they're not going to care about the underlying uh, technology as to how you built it. As long as you deliver, I think that's what matters.
right. Yeah, I do agree with that. Yeah,
So I thought that was an interesting point.
yeah,
Yeah.
it is interesting. Like yeah, it's definitely true because like if you wait until like because there's like a huge issue I think with imposter syndrome with a lot of people.
100%. It's huge.
And
Yeah, I have it all the time.
yeah, and it's at some point it's like it's kind of just a fear of being wrong. Like you don't want to be proven wrong or you don't want to do something wrong.
Right.
And it's like I think there's a lot of merit in like just getting started.
I think but just on the topic of imposter syndrome, I think developers develop imposter syndrome more than any other group of people. I just feel like it's so common because, again, I mean, I'd say a lot of developers are just like me. They don't have accreditation to back them up, right? And that kind of messes you up sometimes, right? You
Right.
don't know if the thing you're doing is the right way, and you don't know if if you really are a good developer or not, right?
Right.
But what kind of helped me out with that is when I started working in a team setting, it
Mhm.
kind of validated the things that I was doing all along. So that really helped. When you work with others, it really helps with the imposter syndrome because you have other developers who can tell you, look, no, you're doing things the right way. You're doing things properly. It really helps. Yeah.
That makes sense. Yeah, it's like I guess it's kind of like being able to be vulnerable
Yeah.
because I know like a lot of people will still work in a team setting.
Hmm.
I think that's where imposter syndrome can kind of be the most dangerous
Hmm.
is when if you're with a team and I guess like let's say you're the only person on the team that went through a boot camp or was self-taught,
Right.
that can definitely be a source of it. But a lot of the time it's also even just like I don't know, like people who come from say a Google or a Facebook or whatever internship or job
Hmm.
typically have like a bit of authority behind their everything that they say,
Hmm.
right? And if you look at like at least nowadays, even like since everyone's kind of working remote, there's a lot more need for like social validation online, right?
Exactly. Yeah. Yeah.
And what I found for myself, I've actually tried to avoid using Twitter as much as I go into, I go onto Twitter and I'm looking at all these people who seem to have like such seasoned careers and they've only been working for like 2 years or a year, and everyone just trusts them. They have thousands of followers. Everything they say sounds really,
Yeah, I
brilliant,
mean,
whatever.
it's funny. It's funny you mentioned that because
Yeah.
I've been following a couple of these guys on YouTube, and I personally think that some of these guys who just started getting into software development
Mhm.
have found a circuit formula, to make themselves seem more authentic than they actually are, right? And there's a lot of YouTubers like I don't have to name them, but there's a few of them out there that I think that are sellouts, right?
Was it?
Sorry, what's that? Yeah, dude, he's tech lead for me. In my opinion, he's the biggest sellout on the planet. Like,
Man, so okay, what do you mean by sellout? I love the guy. I find him hilarious. He has
like,
my dry sense of humor, I think, or he
oh,
could be completely serious. I have no idea. That's the brilliant
like,
part. Like,
dude, the day that he got fired from Facebook, right? Like, literally in that video, he's like, by the way, here's my sponsor, right?
oh yeah,
Like at that point, I realized that that guy was, a sellout, right? And I feel like you have to be careful about where you get your information from.
right.
Make sure that you get your information from credible sources, right? I'm
Mhm.
not saying that people on the information on YouTube is bad, but just make sure you get it from more than one source. That's very important, right? And
Absolutely.
again, not all of Tech Lead's videos are like that. There's a few videos where I think that okay, he's not really being honest. Like for example, he released a video about React, saying how it's a garbage framework. But I
Yeah.
felt like it was biased because he was fired from Facebook, and that's Facebook's framework, right? So,
In the in
uh,
the in the video too, he also kind of he talks about React Native being like there's a different video where he's like React Native sucks or whatever. And in the
right,
video,
right,
he presents the merits of it. He's like, if you're trying not to build to scale, you need to launch quickly. This would be great. And like I like React Native. I use React Native at work. I absolutely agree with that point. I don't think
hmm,
it's like there's a reason that Airbnb, for instance, dropped support for React Native, right?
hmm,
It's not always as scalable. But then for something like Shopify, where most of your traffic is websites anyways,
hmm,
the mobile app can be it's just a back end, right? It's not the whole
hmm.
app. So I think that that's kind of like he makes some valid points, but I do think he is intentionally controversial, which I
Yeah,
don't like, but I find
like,
sometimes, but there is a lot of that, like people trying to stir up kind of like drama around themselves, and
hmm,
yeah.
like even that guy who's doing the machine learning stuff. I forgot his name. Like where he was like copying people's repos and not crediting them, right?
Oh yeah, like he literally just pulled open source, and he had a YouTube channel where he just basically did a walkthrough of
Right.
open source code.
Yeah, and I feel
And
like people nowadays need to be very careful because now I feel like software development is in the spotlight. It's like the in thing now. So this stuff we're going to see it more and more on YouTube. It's going to pop up everywhere, right? So when you are getting information, just make sure you get it from more than one source. And again,
yeah,
I like watching Tech Lead. I like his videos; they're entertaining. But in terms of me trying to get, um, you know, for me to say that's a valid source of information, I would say no. I'd say find multiple sources and then make your own conclusions. You know, yeah.
Yeah, and like I even think there's a so for instance, like one of the ways that a lot of people are getting into web development and or like into development in general rather, like app development, whatever,
Hmm.
is through these boot camps.
Hmm.
And I've noticed that there's like if you've heard of Lambda School,
Yeah, yeah.
I've heard a lot of like I guess bad like press about them, I guess. And like
Hmm.
what I've noticed is a lot of these things like I don't know. There's like the limelight, things are getting out exposed, and then there's people try to profiteer off of it, and then sometimes it
Yeah.
works, sometimes it doesn't. But then other times, like they just kind of, it's people. You might get value out of it, but it's you still have to learn on your own, no matter what. I find like you're not going to get the answers from someone else.
So the one thing is, yeah, you can do these boot camps and you will probably learn a lot, but if you're not taking that knowledge and building something with it, if you're not working on your own project or you're not using it for some sort of job, you're
Yeah,
going to forget about all that stuff. Because again, these boot camps, they're quick. It's like usually a 1 week or 2 week time span, and there's
yeah.
so much information that they cram, right? So
Some of them are, and some of them are. Some of them are like full on school, uh,
hmm.
and that's actually what like this Lambda school thing is. It's I think it's like 6 months or something like that.
Hmm.
Or 3 months, which is still a very short time to learn how to code.
Yeah.
And then they take 30% of your salary if you make over 50,000.
But you see, that's where it kind of gets weird because you have to think, okay, is the stuff you're learning really the stuff that's in right now,
Yeah.
or are they just teaching you here? This is how you do HTML5 and CSS, and here's jQuery, and that's it.
Yeah, I think that most of the schools are teaching the useful stuff.
Hmm.
I've talked to some boot camp grads. I wouldn't want to name names, but then that they've kind of gotten maybe not the greatest experience. They maybe they did learn like intro to web development and you learn HTML CSS and you realize that very few people are still writing like raw HTML CSS. I think it's
Right,
very useful for a designer to learn HTML CSS because they can write
100%.
markups very quickly.
Yeah. And
Uh,
it's still useful to know that stuff.
yeah,
Like even if you're working with a framework like Vue.js or Angular or whatnot, like you'll still have to write CSS. So
of course, yeah.
I mean,
But there is yeah, a lot of these schools like we've hired a lot of bootcamp grads, and
hmm.
some of them are best developers. Like they, a lot of them actually cover teaching or testing. Like a lot of them
Hmm.
cover like modern frameworks. You just got to find the right one. But yeah, like
Right.
I think even there, it's like people kind of need a guiding source or some way of like a bullshit detector.
Hmm. Hmm.
Like it's obvious when you see all these Amazon FBA ads on YouTube or whatever that like this random British kid probably does not know how to make $1 million in 3 months,
Hmm.
but he can say he can, right? But with development, I don't know. There's a lot more technical jargon that you can throw out that could
Right.
possibly.
Yeah, I mean, but like you were saying earlier, I mean, there's a bunch of videos on YouTube where people are putting out software tutorial or just tutorials on certain frameworks and whatnot, and you could tell from someone who's a much more sound developer who's been around in the game for quite some time that this person just literally learned how to do this stuff the day before and just put out this video really quickly, right? And you have to understand like the motive behind some of these people on YouTube. They're not there to really teach you the stuff. At the end they're there to make money, right? And the fastest way possible. They're there to maximize their views, so they're going to use the right keywords. They're going to use the title that's the most catchiest to get your attention, right? So in my opinion, those videos are great if you want to just get your feet wet. But if you really want to learn stuff, download a book or read one of those books on the actual frameworks or the technologies that you want to learn.
Yeah. And do you have any foundational books that you would recommend?
So one book that I just started recently is Intro to Software Development. It's because from you most engineers don't really know how operating systems work, right? Because most of them are focused on writing code, right? And
Yeah.
which is fair. Like you shouldn't have to get that far to understand how an operating system works, because the operating system at the end of the day is just a platform that you write the code on, right? But
Mhm.
it really helps to understand how your code is interpreted or how it's compiled, how it's running, and what goes on under the hood. It makes you a much more well-seasoned developer.
Mhm.
So that's another book that I'm reading. And just aside from reading software development books, I'm reading this book by Jordan Peterson. It's called, I think it's
Follower's
called,
Life or
yes, that's the one. Yeah.
oh, I love it. It's good. He's controversial as hell, but
Yeah.
I do love his writing.
Yeah, and I think it's important to as a developer to also take breaks and do other stuff.
Yeah.
Watch shows. Read different kinds of books. Not everything you do has to be about software development.
Yeah, I've
Yeah.
actually kind of gotten. I go through phases of that where I'll get really into something and I'll just dig in.
Hmm.
Say Kubernetes, for instance, trying to figure out the entire infrastructure and all of that. And like, I think at some point, it's good to have that like that focus. But once it runs out, it's kind of gone, and people start beating themselves up about it.
Right.
And like having something else that you like. So for me, I just recently started running. Like it's just something to disconnect, something to kind of get away from it.
Yeah.
You got to have something else for sure. Like
Yeah.
it's
And when you do those other things, it kind of, let's say you're working on a project for 2 weeks and you're stuck on a certain problem, you don't know how to solve it. When you go and do other things, it gives your brain a time to reset, and then when you approach the problem again, you'll have a lot more, better time. An easier time to solve that issue, I guess.
Do you have any hobbies that you get out and do to kind of get unwind from it?
Uh, right now, I love my Nintendo Switch. It's I just got it about like 4 months ago,
Yeah.
and I've been playing Mario Kart. For me, it just helps me, um, um, just calms me down.
Have you
Because
considered Harvest Moon?
sorry, say that again.
Have you considered Harvest Moon?
No, no, I haven't.
I've heard people Harvest Moon or yeah, the people have been like going on about like just you're basically like fishing, mowing the lawn. It's like real life simulator, but people are doing it because they're forced inside. So it's just like, man, imagine you had a normal life right now.
Yeah, this whole virus has kind of changed the way people work.
Yeah.
It's kind of also given validation for remote work, which I'm pretty happy about. Like that's really good because now, companies are now starting to understand. Hey, you know, there's no need for people to come into the office all the time. People
Mhm.
can do a lot of this stuff from home as long as they have an internet connection,
And I
right?
think it's also like even just now, it's a great opportunity for people who are interested in different companies but just didn't have access because of like geographical issues.
Right, right.
Like the opportunity is now blown up where if you wanted to work for some startup but they're in Vancouver and you've been in Toronto your entire life and you don't want
Hmm.
to move, you can trial it if you
Yeah.
start working with them remotely. Like and
Hmm.
people could even bootstrap freelance careers. Like all sorts of opportunities are kind of opening up.
Yeah, and it's strange because 3 years ago or 2 years ago, you wouldn't have seen this happen. But
Mhm.
like, if you, for example, like Stripe, right? And I've seen this quite often. Like, if you go to their careers page,
Yep.
almost all of it is like remote work,
Yeah,
right?
yeah.
Which is nuts. It's
They've got a few satellite offices or something, and they've got
Yeah,
an office, but it's mostly like all engineering is remote. I think.
yeah, and that's nuts. You would have not seen that 2 years ago or 3 years ago,
Yeah.
right? So I'm glad the landscape is changing. And you know, at times, you like for us, for me personally, at my company, like we have the option of working from home, and sometimes, yeah, you do want to come in the office. You do want to see other faces because it does kind of get tiring working from home
Mhm.
nonstop, right? Like you want to see, you want to have other human contacts. So
Yeah.
yeah, we have the option of doing both, which is fantastic. Yeah.
Yeah, definitely. Like I've missed the office because like I used to kind of thrive off of people just poking me on the shoulder and asking me a question,
Right. Right.
like being able to contribute to other people's projects that way.
Hmm.
But now it's kind of I'm hunkered down. I have to reach out to them, so I'm just
Hmm.
trying to get used to it. I've definitely found like there's a bump in productivity though. Like I'm able to accomplish a lot more. Like, and I'm also still able to go out running now. Whereas before I would have probably worked until like I would stay in the office till like 6 or 7 or 8,
Right.
and
Right.
then go home and not feel up for that sort of thing. Maybe I'd go to the gym, but
Hmm.
now it's kind of a necessity,
Yeah.
and I think it's good in a way. I think there's a lot of problems with it that we need to solve, and I feel bad for anyone who's in like a studio apartment
Hmm.
and trying to work out of their bedroom because
Yeah.
that's to me I think that'd be much more difficult.
Hmm.
But yeah, I think remote work is definitely going to change. like work, the way work happens.
Yeah.
These next, like, I think I'm still looking at it like, who knows, maybe 2, 3, 4 months minimum. Like, that's optimistic. There's going to be a lot of changes, and like, I think, I don't know, there's opportunity there. There's also risk, and I feel bad for people who, like, I feel very, very grateful that I'm in this industry, because if I wasn't, I'm sure that my life would be significantly harder right now than
100%. 100%. Honestly, I feel very lucky to be a part of this industry. Like you said, like I feel like we're riding the high wave right now of it, right? Like we just got in at the perfect time to, to capitalize the most on it. So I'm very glad that we're living in this time right now to experience this. But yeah, I just hope, I don't know how long it's going to last, to be honest,
Yeah. It's hard.
So yeah, man. But yeah, like, just even on that topic of working from home, that's also another thing for you to consider when you're applying to jobs. You can tell whether or not a company cares about its employees based on, whether they have work from home policies or the perks that they have, or, um, the the kind of things, the kind of incentives they do for self-learning or for you to move up in the company, right? So some companies, what they do is they actually have some sort of budget or a fund for you to take a course or something so that you can move up. And when you think about it from that perspective, companies are doing that to make you happy, but also it helps the company in the long run as well, because now they've invested into their own team, right? And
it brings up the level. It makes them, if like for certain teams, it makes them seem more credible. Well, it makes them more credible.
Right.
Industry. Like for me, my last job, I came from a company that was huge on that tribal scale, used to invest like, I think it was $1,000 a year you could just put onto any program. And
right.
it was like $500 or something like that. And then, $1,000 if you got paid, if you went to a conference, you could go to one conference at your 1 year or something like that, paid on for the company up to $1,000. It was very, I never took advantage of that, but I did get the Google, did one of these Google certs or whatever. And it was super useful. I got a cool backpack out of it.
Nice.
But yeah, I think those sorts of opportunities are great, because you not only do you get, so as a result, we actually had a partnership with GCP. It helped a lot with finding clients and whatnot. But it also helps, with career, and just I think it's a focused way to, because it's these courses are prohibitively expensive for individuals, but they're not expensive at all for
a team.
For a team, yeah.
Yeah.
My current company, we're trying to get into more just build out our recognition for different platforms we work with. And so a lot of people have been doing certifications in specific things like Contentful and things like that.
Yeah.
To make us a partner with them, and I think it's good that teams invest in their employees. It's my thought is, if a place is a good place to learn, you're not gonna attract, you don't have to attract the best engineers in the world, because you can create the best engineers in the world.
100%. I agree with that 100%. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
Culture is just, it's amazing, because if you can tap anyone on the shoulder and kind of pick their brain about a topic or learn. That's kind of why I started this podcast, is it's just such a fun way to talk to people who have got completely different directions throughout their careers, and just how they think. And it's being able to learn from other people is just one of the best things you can do.
Yeah, 100%.
Cool. We're actually up, I think, over an hour now. Did you have anything else that you wanted to chat about for the last say 5 minutes, or anything you wanna shamelessly plug? Do you have anything?
No, I don't have anything to plug. I mean, I just wanted to do this because it was interesting. I just like how you wanted to pick people's brains, I wanted to do the same thing. So
yeah, no, I appreciate you coming on.
Yeah. I mean, that's pretty much it. I don't know what else to talk about.
What we already covered books. What would you? What's your one thing that you would recommend to say an engineer who's either someone who's just getting started in engineering, computer science, computer programming, or is in their first or second job, intermediate, that junior kind of level, and they really want to level up. What was your number one tip?
I'd say my number one tip is to believe in yourself more than you do. And I mean, I think that's the biggest thing because a lot of juniors who do start out, they have again the whole imposter syndrome, right? Um, you should be confident in your abilities and also validate them with the people that you work around with. I think that's the most important thing. The people who you surround yourself with in your team,
Mhm.
based on that, you can propel yourself forward, right? Um, again, like I always keep bringing this back to my team because again, I've never been more happier than to work with these group of people that I work with right now. But I've learned so much from these group of people,
Mhm.
and that what I've learned is so valuable, right? Um, and before I even started, like I was nowhere near at the level that I am now, right? And a lot of that has to do with your willingness to learn, your willingness to ask questions. Like there's no such thing as a stupid question. I think it's not there's no such thing as a stupid question. So if you don't know something, just ask. You
Yep.
know, ask the developers around you, hey, how does this work? You know, because when you do that, that's like once you know something, then you can transfer that knowledge to someone else, right? So it's and when teams do share knowledge like that, it helps the team as a whole. It helps the company as a whole. It helps everybody because now we can all ship code faster. We can write features quicker, right? We're all on the same page. So, yeah, I mean, that's
I love it.
that's my advice. Just to believe in yourself more than you do, I guess.
Believe in yourself and ask questions.
Yeah,
I love
100%.
it. All
Yeah,
right. Thanks a lot, man.
yeah, no worries.
Yeah, I'm gonna